The Big Light presents.
A big thing for me is not feeling different and not feeling like a disadvantaged person. I'm reminded enough on a daily basis that I can't eat and drink the things that I used to, and that my body's weaker than it used to be.
My name is Helena Rafai, and this is the A Sonic Hug podcast. Over the coming episodes, you're going to hear the voices of people from different walks of life who deal, experience and battle mental health issues. In this episode of Series 4, I speak with Adam Miller, a journalist, football fan and podcast presenter. In our conversation, Adam opens up about his experience with Crohn's disease, a diagnosis that arrived in September 2019 and dramatically altered his relationship with food, socialising and his sense of self. His story touches on navigating chronic illness during the pandemic as someone who was clinically vulnerable, the impact of his mental health and the complexities of maintaining a busy career while managing a challenging condition. This is Adam's story.
For me, with mental health, in 2019, September 2019, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, which was in some way a relief because I'd been experiencing pain for a while, and it was, in some respects, it was nice to actually have an answer and then have doctors be able to approach it with the medication and all the rest of it. But in another sense, it was completely life-changing. It's placed massive restrictions on the way that I'm able to live my life, on diet, on drink, on socialising, things like that. And it's something that no matter what I'm doing, I have to think about several times a day. One of the things they tell you when you're diagnosed with Crohn's disease and they present you with the big long list of, what it's going to do to your life is that it does tend to have an impact on your mental health. And I've never been someone who's suffered from depression. I've had low moments. I've had, times, particularly in my kind of early 20s, where I'd feel low for sustained periods. But with Crohn's disease, you're putting a lot of drugs into your body in order to look after it. But I think the biggest way in which it impacts upon your mental health is the limits that it places upon you in terms of what you can and can't do with your life. And it means you have maybe a bit more time to yourself, where you're not able to enjoy yourself and the things that you would maybe reach for in terms of nights out and drink and things like that would maybe be a crutch or just even a way of easing yourself into social situations. They're no longer on the table for you, or certainly not to the same extent. And I think it was intensified by the pandemic, as the pandemic had an impact on so many people's mental health. But for me, it was specifically the fact that because I was on so much medication, it meant that I was in what they called the clinically vulnerable community, or on that list. And so I was told to shield essentially for long periods of time. So you'd have the lockdown, and then you would say, right, everyone can go about their business apart from the vulnerable people and the old people. Even when lockdowns were lifted, I was still at home, and that was going on for maybe 18 months, 2 years, however long it was, before I was starting to properly live life again. Crohn's, what it means is your body just can't handle certain types of food or drink, and it causes a lot of pain for you. For me, prior to going into hospital with it, I'd had stomach problems for quite a while, but being a kind of typical bloke about it was like, it's manageable. I won't bother the doctor about it, which is regrettably the way a lot of men seem to view these situations. In August 2019, so not long after I got married, actually, there were just about 8 or 9 other symptoms came on all at once, and I was in a really bad way. I was in hospital for about 11 days or so, and they diagnosed me with Crohn's disease, and it means that about 95% of the different types of food that I would have enjoyed beforehand, and about 99% of the alcohol and the soft drinks and all the rest of it, anything fun is out, really. And so it's been trying to adjust to that and the impact that has on you in a social setting, plus being in that vulnerable group. I mean, I've been very fortunate in the sense that my wife was living with me and she was very considerate and understanding of my situation. And I think it would have been a lot harder to deal with on my own. The first few months, I think, of COVID, I mean, it was a horrible time for everyone. But at the same time, like so many people did during the pandemic, first few months, you're really into the exercise and all that side of it. And so I was really kind of physically, I was keeping myself really fit. I was in the best shape. Aside from having a chronic illness, I was in the best shape of my life. And mentally, it was great spending time with my wife and things were going well at work. And then there were more and more changes in terms of my job, and I chose to go freelance. Long term, it was a good move in terms of my career, but I made the mistake of, as a lot of people do when they work freelance, just saying yes to everything. You know, you think, if I turn this down, I might not get this opportunity again, and then how am I going to pay the bills in 2 months' time, and all the rest of it. It was that kind of tenuous lifestyle. And I got to a point just before I went freelance, I was having a really, really difficult time in my job. I was in the room physically, but I wasn't in the room mentally with my wife. I was just responding to the incessant beep, beep, beep of my work laptop, and I couldn't focus on my life. That was the first kind of really difficult point. And then I'd taken on so much work as a freelancer. I was doing a TV programme that I'd written for the BBC. I was doing weekly column for the Glasgow Times, and I was doing my own podcast, which was in and of itself almost like a full-time job, the amount of work that I was putting into that. And then I was also taking on other freelance commissions at the time. Looking back on it, it was just a terrible idea doing all of that stuff, but they were all opportunities, particularly the BBC one, that I thought that might never come up again. So I've just got to say yes and dig in. And the amount of work I was doing, and I wasn't sleeping, it was having a really kind of detrimental impact on me psychologically. And then one of the biggest triggers with Crohn's disease, you have to manage it with your diet, but you also have to manage it by avoiding too much stress and by sleeping well. And in order to get through all that work, I was barely giving myself any time to sleep. I was constantly stressed, and I was just reaching for food here and there when I could. And none of it was healthy physically or mentally. So those 2 times in particular, I think, were pretty difficult. Loss of identity is probably a good way of putting it. I had a real sort of kind of breaking point. People over the years have followed me for daft jokes about football. And, you know, as it progressed and I got older and got more confident with it, I would, you know, start sharing serious things or would start writing serious things. But I know that people don't generally come to me to hear the football jokes guy talking about, you know, he's had a bad night. But not long after I started at the Herald, there were work drinks in the office. And I remember really looking forward to it, just thinking, you know, it was a good opportunity to meet new people. And I always like those kind of nights out with when I'm in jobs. You know, those are the kind of situations where I'd have a couple of drinks. I've never been a guy for getting just completely off my face and making a fool of myself. I've always been someone who's, and you know, fairly kind of quiet, reserved person, and then I maybe get a few drinks in me. I remember, you know, the author Chris McQueer, I remember him talking once about that kind of 3-pint buzz you get where you're not pissed, but you're just more confident and more relaxed. And I always felt that was, you know, in terms of socializing, that was maybe the kind of best version of myself was, you know, you can have a couple of drinks in you and suddenly you just feel like, oh, I'm not overthinking anymore. I'm not worried about being judged. I'll tell this story, I'll tell this joke, and you make friends that way and everything's that bit easier. And I remember thinking with this drinks thing, well, this is great because I'm really excited about this job. I'm really enjoying it so far. It'll be a great opportunity to meet loads of people. But what I realised when I got to this thing that they only had beer, which is out for me, sadly. And I can't remember what the food was, but it was stuff I couldn't have. And I just remember I was kind of standing there really just self-conscious of the fact I couldn't drink. Through no fault of anyone's, but it was that way of just, I felt a slight kind of kick to the stomach. It was that sort of realisation that this is kind of my life now, is that I'm not going to have that crutch, you know, be able to rely on being a bit more confident because I've had a couple of drinks and stuff like that. And I felt like I just couldn't be that sociable a guy that night. I remember just on the way home, I was walking home and I just felt like crying, and it sounds so stupid because I'm a grown man, and it's not like it was like someone's sweet 16th and, tried to get off with someone, didn't want to get off with me. It was just a casual work drinks, I'd been looking forward to it, and then it was that realization that, right, okay, your life is different, things are different because you have Crohn's. And I just kind of on the way home, I just felt so gutted, and I had a bit of a kind of, I don't know why, but I just thought, I want some people to say it's all right, mate. And I put it on Twitter, and I had so many nice messages from people. And it did kind of, stuff like that does kind of restore your faith in humanity a wee bit, that people will reach out to you and say nice things and buck you up and all the rest of it. That idea, that sort of loss of your identity, I did always see myself as someone who was, if not necessarily life and soul, someone who you get a couple of drinks in them, you just get good crack, a few jokes, a few stories, very sociable. And I just realised I've forgotten how to do that.
Life often shifts in unexpected ways, and as we listen to Adam's experience of navigating these changes, let's create a moment of stillness together. Sometimes we need to pause, just as we must when our bodies or circumstances ask us to slow down. Find whatever position feels right for you now. Take a full breath, filling your lungs, then releasing it slowly. Perhaps you felt the weight of change in your own life, or recognise the challenge of accepting new limitations. Or maybe you're simply here listening. Whatever you're bringing to this moment is welcome. Join me in 3 steady breaths. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4. Carry whatever resonates, and when you're comfortable, we'll return to Adam's story.
I'm very conscious, whether it be in restaurants or in the pub, not being that guy. I don't want to be saying, because they'll always come over to you, which is a good thing in theory. They'll always come over to you and go, "Is anyone at the table get any allergies or anything like that?" And I feel like if I were to list the things I couldn't have, we'd be here for hours. So I just always say it's fine, because there'll always be one thing on the menu that I can have. I'm always conscious, though, in those situations of I'm not normal anymore. I can't be like just a normal guy who can have everything on the menu. I am very aware it's difficult for my wife, for choosing somewhere where we can eat, or if I'm out with friends, I can't have a soft drink, I can't have a pint, and all the rest of it. And so I wouldn't say there's shame attached to it, because it's not something that I've contributed to myself. You don't get Crohn's through your own behaviour, it's just bad luck. But there's definitely an awkwardness and a loss of confidence in social situations. I don't know if there was one dramatic low point. And I don't want to paint my life as bad. I'm generally happy in my life, and my wife, my friends, my family. We've got a lot, and my job as well, which I really like. Got a lot of good things going, very happy in that regard. But it's been such a kind of monumental shift in how I've had to live my life, even before you add the pandemic into it, that I don't know if there's been so much one standout moment of a real low. There's just been a kind of succession of reminders that things are difficult. One of my best friends had a stag do in Glasgow, and I had to leave that halfway through the night. It was in too much pain, and things like that just, that you're missing out on things that you wouldn't have missed out on before. That not only are you missing out on those memories, but you're also not necessarily causing a scene, but you're also aware that people are maybe going to pity you, or they might go, "Oh, it's a shame what happened to him," and you don't want to live your life like that. You don't want to be thinking that that's the way people see you. So yeah, I wouldn't say that there was one particular moment. I would say the kind of lowest was probably when I was just before I went freelance and I quit my job. The person that I was then was just, that's probably the lowest I've been in my life. And my wife said that she was really concerned for me at the time. The other thing I was talking about when I was doing the BBC, the Glasgow Times, the podcast, and all the other freelance stuff, I look back on that now and I think I did a lot of good work around that time, but I also think, I was doing these things that I should have been excited about. Getting to write a column about whatever you want, it's a real luxury if you're a journalist. writing a BBC show about football. That should have been like the most exciting thing that's happened in my career. And on paper it was. And the guy that I was working with on it, Eamon, was brilliant. I loved working with Eamon. But the experience, I was just so stressed and so unwell, physically in a lot of pain. Yeah, it's just been a kind of succession of moments like that, I would say, that have been difficult. One of the many, many problems with Crohn's is that it's not one of those conditions where people can give you the big Crohn's cookbook, although I do know these things exist, in the big Crohn's rule book, and say these are the steps you must follow and these are the foods you must eat, because Crohn's is different for everyone. I'm in a fortunate position where, whether it was because of the severity or whatever, or how quickly it was diagnosed, I'm not someone who's had to have surgery. I'm not someone who's had to have a stoma bag, which is something that a lot of people with, or some people with IBDs have. I'm fortunate in those respects, but where I'm unfortunate is that I'm 4 years into it and I'm learning things that, all right, I shouldn't have had that. And you're normally fairly quick to be able to work out, yeah, that was a bad one. And it's hard to be disciplined all the time, particularly when you're socialising. If it is a wedding or a holiday, there is that temptation of, oh, what's the worst that can happen? You have to try and just be disciplined and stay on top of it. And then there is that almost kind of guilt if you do push it too far and pay the cost with that pain the next day or even that same day. It is a constant kind of learning curve you're on with Crohn's. But there are lots and lots of things that I can definitively point to and say I can never eat that again. You know, I've not had a soft drink in 4 years. I've not had a pint of anything other than Guinness for 4 years. Things like that. I've not had red meat for 4 years. You know, most of the fun stuff's out. That's the bottom line with Crohn's. It definitely adds to your stress, particularly in social situations. So I was at Glastonbury and then I had 2 consecutive weekends down in London just for gigs. I don't know if anxiety is necessarily the right word, but you do have that kind of constant awareness of everything here looks great, but I've really got to kind of rein myself in. I've got to think about this logically. You know, I'm on a trip here that we've been looking forward to for ages. If I give in to temptation just now and eat or drink the wrong thing, then I'm going to ruin the rest of the trip for myself, and I'm going to make things awkward with my friends, or am I going to make things a drag for my wife? So you aren't just thinking for yourself, you know, you're thinking about the impact that's going to have on the people around you. That definitely does add to the stress. I think in terms of coping strategies, I think my problem is that I'm good at giving advice and not always great at following it. This is one of the things that I think feels quite, validating is probably the wrong word, but something I'm quite proud of. I've tried to, over a few years, trying to, you know, share advice, let's say the demographic, if you want to call it that, people that follow me or read my columns or whatever, is going to be maybe 60, 70% male, and maybe sort of 60, 70% of them will be under 40. And it's very well known that that is a group that where there are a lot of people who do struggle with mental health. And so I talk quite a lot by DM about, you know, we'll just get into chats around things like that. And I'm always saying, get a good night's sleep, try and be active, get outside, all those kind of things, force yourself to do all those things. And when I do those things, I feel much better for it, but I don't always follow that advice. What I'm guilty of, I think, is sometimes kind of getting me into a bit of a slump. I always, unless I'm unwell, unless I'm having a bad day with Crohn's, I'll always work in the office because I like that interaction. So again, going outside, trying to socialise with people, trying to keep yourself engaged, because if you're just sitting slumping on the couch, the hours just go by so quickly. And it's almost like a vicious cycle because you see the hours going by and then you get down about the fact you've achieved nothing with your day. And that's when those feelings of kind of guilt or shame would come in. A big thing for me has been cutting down on Twitter, to be honest. For years, I would tweet all the time. Not all the time, I would tweet a lot. Any big football story, I would be tweeting about it, making jokes and all the rest of it. And I feel like now there never was pressure on me to do it, but I feel like that was my thing. And through that, all those nice opportunities have come up in my life. And I'm now professionally in a position where I'm really happy. And I don't feel like there's an expectation where I have to tweet about every big thing just to keep that going. You know, I'm happier when I'm not on Twitter. Just scrolling through the timeline, you might get 1 or 2 jokes, but everything else is just negativity. It's transphobia, it's racism, it's whatever. It's just negativity, it's nastiness. And so that's a big thing for me, is if you're not required to for work or whatever, because for me, it doesn't help. It only makes things worse. But yeah, the biggest coping strategies for me, I think, would be just sleep, getting outdoors, socializing with people if you can. I mean, obviously, I can't recommend my wife as a coping strategy for everyone. She's been fantastic for me as well. She's been incredibly understanding. When she's down, I look out for her, and vice versa. I think kind of approach everything as a team. I will say, I think most of the people around me have been great in terms of Crohn's disease. I think it's novel enough. It's quite an unusual disease or condition that people kind of have questions, or they're kind of curious about it. And generally, people are been very understanding. And to be honest, one of the things that works well for me with it is that my friends will have a laugh with me about it. I would rather that they were doing that than kind of handling me with kid gloves and treating me as if I was kind of weaker or less capable. In some respects, I've been dealt a bad hand with Crohn's, but everyone's got their things going on, and some people are in far worse conditions than I am, whether it be with other conditions or with Crohn's itself. Some people I've managed to, through a combination of, diet and the lots of medication that I'm on, I've got it into a manageable position where I just have to sacrifice a lot in terms of food and drink, and I have to keep up my medication and all the rest of it. But it's not sending me to hospital or anything like that. And that's not something that everyone with Crohn's can say. So, I try to just go about my life and try and not think about it too much, and not feel like I'm living in a kind of lesser life as a result of it. I would certainly say being understanding when I'm in a restaurant or a bar, that, no one's saying to me, why aren't you having that dish? Why aren't you having a pint and all the rest of it? I think it's one of the things that would have maybe been different 20 years or so ago. When you go to a pub and don't order a drink, have a water, which is what I'm just saying, because I can't have a soft drink either. People don't go, come on, have a pint. I think there are lots of reasons why people might not be drinking. And generally, and it might be a generational thing, but for my generation, I think people are good now at not pushing it, not wanting to find out why you're not drinking and all the rest of it. So I would say, in terms of if a friend of yours has Crohn's or something similar, or ulcerative colitis or whatever, I would say the biggest things you can do are be understanding, not push them to have something that they don't want to eat or drink. And also, if you've got that kind of relationship with them, have a laugh about it, should make a joke. I think I've referred to myself in one of the group chats a few times as Crohn and Keating. There's a good thing about Crohn's is that not many people get it. It's not a very common disease. Weirdly, as a Jewish person, or a person from a Jewish family, or Ashkenazi Jews are 4 times more likely to get it. So I don't know if that's just something to do with we've always been a naturally stressed people. I don't know what that's about. But generally, you walk down the street, there's a fair chance if I walk down Buchanan Street on a Saturday afternoon, busy shopping day, I could get from the top to the bottom of Buchanan Street and no one there would have Crohn's. Maybe one person might have Crohn's there. It's not a very common disease. And there are plenty of people with it in Scotland, but not that many. And so I think it would be difficult to ask society to be more accommodating. I quite like how it is at the moment. It would have been a different answer 15, 20 years ago, because if you walk into Sainsbury's now, or Tesco's, wherever, there's whole ranges of vegan and gluten-free options, and they're not just kind of, here's a box that we're ticking for vegan people or for gluten-free people or whatever. There's thought that's put into these products. Now, there's an awareness that more and more people, some for ideological reasons and some for health, purely for health reasons, are on largely vegan or gluten-free diets or whatever. And so I think a lot more thought than there used to be is being put into accommodating people like that. And as I was saying earlier, you go into a restaurant and 9 times out of 10, you'll get asked, does anyone at the table have any allergies and all the rest of it? It's just not common enough condition, I think, for, to expect that society goes out its way to accommodate us any more than it does. A big thing for me is not feeling different and not feeling like a disadvantaged person. I'm reminded enough on a daily basis that I can't eat and drink the things that I used to, and that my body's weaker than it used to be, and that things like COVID and colds and flus are more of a risk in terms of the damage that they can do to me than they would be for someone who wasn't taking the medication that I'm taking. Aside from anything else, it'd just be too awkward. It'd be too difficult because, as I said earlier, I can't really give you a list of what I can and can't eat because I'm still figuring that out for myself. Knowing what I know now, the advice that I would give myself prior to being diagnosed with Crohn's is go to the doctor sooner, you idiot, would be one. Another one would be don't be afraid to say no to certain opportunities in your career. Don't worry about, if I say no, they won't ask me again, because most of the time you do get asked again. And my wife has always been a big advocate for getting me to say no to more things, because while I was trying to manage a chronic illness, I just gave myself too much work. And as I said before, stress is one of the biggest triggers. So I would say don't feel like you're going to solve Crohn's overnight. It's a constant learning process. Get your sleep, try and cut down on stressful situations. I would say manage your diet better than I've spent the last 4 years doing, because although I've eliminated so many things and I'm impressed with myself that things like soft drinks and beer and red meat that were big parts of my life I'm not doing that. Fruit and veg are almost entirely out as well with Crohn's, and I find myself I'm not replacing those things well enough. So I'm not in particularly good shape just now compared to where I was 2 years ago. And a lot of that's just grabbing for crisps and things like that. I'm limited in my options. So I would say try and resist the temptation of going for the easy thing. Put the work in terms of your diet. Don't give up the exercise. Stick with the exercise, because there were aside from the physical benefits for me, psychologically, I always felt great. I was doing, although I was confined to the flat, I was doing a lot of exercise at the time, and I did really feel the benefit of that. So when you get your symptoms, go to the doctors and be persistent with it. I've made sort of allusions over the last few years on Twitter and elsewhere to having a chronic illness. I would say maybe speak about having Crohn's earlier, because I think you'll have other people who have Crohn's who might want to talk to you about it. Try and appreciate the support that you have around you from my wife, from family, friends, also from my boss is very understanding as well. Yeah, I think that would be it.
The quiet disruption of chronic illness emerges powerfully in Adam's story. Beyond the physical impact of Crohn's disease lies a profound shift in how someone moves through the world, where every social gathering becomes a careful calculation and the simplest invitation requires complex navigation. There is an untold cost in what Adam calls the fun stuff, not just in what can't be eaten or drunk, but in those spontaneous moments of connection that many take for granted. His description of that work gathering, standing apart with his water while colleagues shared drinks, cuts to the heart of how isolation can manifest in the most everyday spaces. The pandemic years added another dimension, with clinical vulnerability creating literal distance on top of the social barriers Crohn's had already built. Yet within this challenge, Adam's story reveals something crucial about adaptation, how we can learn to redraw the boundaries of our lives without letting them define us. His insights about freelance work and stress management, highlighting the delicate balance those with chronic illness must strike, weighing opportunities against well-being, ambition against health needs. The pressure to say yes to everything, despite knowing the physical cost, speaks to a broader struggle many face in validating their limitations. When Adam talks about being not normal anymore, he touches on something rarely discussed: the internal reconciliation required when illness shifts not just what you can do, but how you see yourself. His ongoing process of learning what his body can and can't handle mirrors the larger journey of accepting a changed relationship with both his health and his identity. Adam, in sharing these experiences, from the seemingly small moments of standing apart in social gatherings to the larger questions of how to maintain a career while managing chronic illness, you've highlighted the complex reality of living with Crohn's disease. Your story reminds us that well-being isn't just about managing symptoms, but about finding ways to preserve joy and connection within new parameters. I hope you keep holding space for both the challenges and the possibilities as you continue to navigate this path. Thank you. If you have experienced or are experiencing anything described in this episode, then you will find support information in the notes to accompany this podcast. A Sonic Hug podcast is recorded, edited and produced by me, Helena Rafai. Until next time, deep breaths.
From the Big Light Studio.